Ruby Ridge story. A mother's instinct is to protect her child, to hold them close when danger is near, to shield them from the world. But what happens when that protective embrace is the very thing that puts them in the crosshairs? What happens when the government, the very entity sworn to protect you, decides that a mother holding her baby is a justifiable target? This is the story of how one family's dream of being left alone ended in a deadly siege. This is the story of Ruby Ridge. Part 1. The Dream of a Life Apart. It all started with a dream. Back in 1983, Randy and Vicky Weaver had become disillusioned with the world. They saw it as corrupt and fallen, and they wanted out. So, they bought 20 acres of rugged, isolated land in northern Idaho and named it Ruby Ridge. For them, this wasn't just property. It was a promise of a life on their own terms, completely free from government interference. Randy, a former Green Beret, put his skills to work building a simple cabin. There was no electricity, no running water. Life was hard, but it was theirs. Vicky, a devout Christian with strong separatist beliefs, homeschooled their children, Sarah, Sammy, and Rachel. Their lives were guided by nature, family, and faith. All they wanted was to be left alone to raise their kids according to their own deeply held, if unconventional, convictions. And for years, they pretty much got their wish. They were a family living on the edge of society, getting by on what the land and their own resourcefulness could provide. Some neighbors thought they were strange, maybe even paranoid, but they were a family. They had found their little corner of the world. The problem was, the world wasn't going to leave them there. The government had started paying attention, and a series of small missteps was about to spiral into a national tragedy. Part 2. The Spark of Conflict. The federal government first took an interest in Randy Weaver in the mid-'80s. He'd attended a few meetings of the Aryan Nations, a notorious white supremacist group. While he always denied being a member, his anti-government talk put him on the radar. So, in 1989, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, opened an investigation. The plan wasn't to arrest him for his beliefs, but to use those beliefs to entrap him. An ATF informant pretended to be a fellow sympathizer and repeatedly asked Weaver to sell him illegal sawed-off shotguns. Weaver was reluctant at first, but he eventually sold the informant 2 shotguns with barrels cut just a fraction of an inch shorter than the legal limit. With that sale, the ATF had the leverage they wanted. But they didn't just want an arrest. They wanted Randy to become an informant and spy on the Aryan Nations. When they confronted him with the offer, he refused. So, the government moved ahead with the firearms charge. In January 1991, he was arrested and then released on bail. This is where a simple mistake turned fatal. A letter sent to Weaver gave him the wrong court date. It said he was due on March 20th, when the actual date was February 20th. When he didn't show up, a warrant was issued for his arrest. For a man like Randy Weaver, who was already deeply suspicious of the government, this was all the proof he needed. He was convinced the feds were setting him up, and he'd never get a fair trial. So he retreated to his cabin on Ruby Ridge, vowing never to leave. He was now a fugitive, hiding from a minor charge, with no idea he was setting the stage for a violent and historic confrontation. Part 3. The siege begins. For the next 18 months, an uneasy quiet settled over Ruby Ridge. The U.S. Marshal Service was tasked with bringing Weaver in, but they knew a direct assault on his remote cabin would be risky. They watched, they planned, and they waited. That wait ended violently on the morning of August 21, 1992. A team of 6 heavily armed U.S. Marshals in full camo was doing surveillance near the cabin. They weren't spotted by a person, but by the family's dog, Stryker. The dog started barking and gave chase, and the situation immediately fell apart. One of the marshals shot and killed the dog. Hearing the shot, 14-year-old Sammy Weaver and a 24-year-old family friend, Kevin Harris, ran out with their guns. A frantic, confused gunfight broke out among the trees. When it was over, 2 people were dead. U.S. Marshal William Deegan had been killed, shot by Kevin Harris, and 14-year-old Sammy Weaver had been shot in the back and killed by a federal agent. The dream of a peaceful life was now a nightmare. A boy was dead, and a federal officer had been killed. There was no going back. Back at the cabin, Randy and Vicky carried their son's body to a small shed. They were now surrounded, grieving, and terrified. The original firearms charge was a distant memory. This was no longer about a missed court date. The FBI was called in. Its elite hostage rescue team was dispatched, and the standoff at Ruby Ridge was about to get much, much worse. Part 4. The Sniper's Perch. When the FBI's hostage rescue team arrived, the entire situation changed. While on their way to Idaho, commanders wrote up a new, highly controversial set of rules of engagement. Standard FBI policy says deadly force can only be used in self-defense, when there's an imminent threat of death or serious injury. But the new rules for Ruby Ridge were different. They stated that agents can and should use deadly force against any armed adult male they saw outside the cabin, even if that person wasn't an immediate threat. These rules were later found to be unconstitutional. On the afternoon of August 22nd, the day after the first shootout, FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi was in position, watching the cabin from 200 yards away. Randy Weaver, Kevin Harris, and Randy's 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, stepped outside and walked toward the shed where Sammy's body lay. They were carrying guns. Horiuchi, believing the men might fire at an FBI helicopter, took his first shot, hitting Randy Weaver in the arm. As the wounded Weaver and the others scrambled back toward the cabin, Horiuchi lined up a second shot. His target was Kevin Harris, who he believed had killed Marshal Deegan. Inside the cabin, Vicky Weaver was standing by the door, holding her 10-month-old baby, Elishaba. She was waiting for her family to get back inside, holding the door open for Kevin Harris as Randy and Sarah dove through. Horiuchi fired again. The .308 caliber bullet ripped through the door, missing his intended target completely. Instead, it struck Vicky Weaver in the head, killing her instantly. The bullet passed through her and hit Kevin Harris in the chest and arm. Vicky fell to the floor, still clutching her baby. The world the Weavers had tried so hard to escape hadn't just found them. It had shattered their lives in the most brutal way imaginable. Part 5. Aftermath and a lingering legacy. For 9 more days, the siege dragged on. Inside the cabin, the surviving Weavers huddled in grief and terror. Vicky's body lay on the kitchen floor for the rest of the standoff. Outside, hundreds of federal agents, armored vehicles, and helicopters had turned the remote mountainside into a war zone. The standoff finally ended on August 31st, not with force but through negotiation. A retired Green Beret named Bo Gritz talked them down. A wounded Kevin Harris surrendered first, followed by Randy Weaver and his 3 surviving daughters. The legal battle that came next was almost as stunning as the siege itself. Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris were tried for a long list of crimes, including the murder of Marshal Deegan. But in a shocking verdict, a jury acquitted Kevin Harris of all charges. Randy Weaver was acquitted of all major charges too, including murder and conspiracy. He was only convicted for the original failure to appear in court and a bail violation. The verdict felt like a powerful rebuke of how the government had handled the entire situation. In the years that followed, internal Justice Department investigations heavily criticized the FBI's actions, especially the unconstitutional rules of engagement. While a few officials were disciplined, many felt real justice was never served. The Weaver family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and the government settled for $3.1 million without ever admitting any wrongdoing. The story of Ruby Ridge left deep scars on the country and raised huge questions about government power versus individual liberty. What do you think about this tragic chapter in American history? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see how these events helped shape the next decade, be sure to watch our video on the Waco siege, which happened just 6 months later. Ruby Ridge was more than just a standoff. It became a symbol. For many, it was the ultimate example of government overreach, a story of a family that was hunted down for just wanting to be left alone. The names Ruby Ridge and Waco would become rallying cries for a growing anti-government movement, fueling a deep-seated distrust of federal power that still echoes in our politics today. It was a tragedy born from a cascade of mistakes, paranoia, and violence, and a dark reminder of what can happen when communication fails and force becomes the only answer.